So overall weight, on what's good weight or what's unhealthy weight, she's a little bit overweight. You should be able to run your hands along them and feel ribs, but not see ribs. So like I said, she's a little bit overweight, but we will be more active this summer, hopefully. Also, if she was standing up, you should be able to see a little bit of an hourglass kind of, I know, I'm sorry, that's not nice, but an hourglass where, and that's how you'd know if they were a little bit overweight, if it was just either extended or even just out. So knowing these are going to help you to diagnose other problems down the road. So the next thing that you want to check on your dog is you want to check and see what, if their poop is normal. And I know that's a kind of a gross thing, but you know, they don't have anybody else that can help, you know, diagnose early problems. Any dog poop should be brown. It should be not too dry, but not runny. There shouldn't be any mucus. And so we can talk more about what the cause, you know, what problems can occur, but that can be a good sign of parasites. It can be a sign of, you know, any internal problems, even problems with their organs and stuff if they were having struggles can be detected through looking at their feces. The other thing that would be a good idea is when you get a new puppy or a new dog, the nails, it's always a sensitive area for the dog. If you start as a puppy, it's a lot easier because you can give them treats and you can teach them that it's not such a bad thing. But just a basic guideline, she's got some white nails, so it helps. You can see that the nail comes down and then of course starts to curve down, and you can see through it and see that there is the pink part that's the quick. I don't know if you can quite tell. But the best way to trim the nails, and it's always better to err on caution, is I put them on and then just kind of slide it up there and then just the very tip and cut. And so because you can see the quick, it's easy to know where to cut. This is something that you can do, or if you're really uncomfortable or your pet's really uncomfortable, the vets don't charge that much to trim nails. Why do you want to trim them? Because they can get, if they get too long, they can get them caught on things. And one of the most painful things that I've seen come into the vet's office where I work is either a nail that's been broken off, but still hanging on, or like the dew claw, the little extra one that some of them have, that one can also get ripped pretty bad, and it's very painful. So keeping them trimmed helps them, also, you know, and helps keep you from having to go to a vet visit if it's unnecessary. One more thing that people sometimes don't really think about, it's kind of gross, is the anal gland. So dogs and cats have an anal gland. They are just located right next to the rectum on each side. Now, some people are courageous and they want to clean their dog's anal glands, and other people are just as courageous but don't want to, and they take them to the vet. Again, it's really not that expensive to take them to the vet and have them do it, and it just takes a moment, and then your dog won't be as mad at you. You can just get it done. You can get gloves. So I just get these type of gloves from like Harbor Freight or any medical supply, but Harbor Freight has them for pretty cheap. And you'll know if your dog has problems with anal glands if they're, you know, scooting on the carpet or scooting on the grass and kind of dragging it. It can be uncomfortable if they get full. Normally, when a dog goes in and goes out and, you know, does their business, that cleans out the anal glands. They normally excrete them. But their diet, if it's not firm enough, it can also be a problem, and they won't excrete that, and it can get plugged up. So that's another, they can also get abscesses and things. It's not that common, but it's a good idea to know what's normal and what can happen if you don't check the anal glands. So if you're going into your vet to just do a normal health checkup, you can just have the vet check the anal glands, or if they're exhibiting some of those signs. One other thing on the abdomen. So on a healthy dog, and I think it's important to know what these things feel like so that when something goes wrong, you can have something to compare it to. So the abdomen should be soft. There shouldn't be any pain with a little pressure from any angle. She's not exhibiting any pain, so that's good. She's wondering what I'm doing, but so those are some of the things that you need to know on your dog, to know what's normal. And then as far as nail clippers and stuff, there's so many different kinds. Doesn't really matter which clippers you use, as long as they are sharp and strong, because you don't want to get something that's not going to be able to cut through and end up with, more pain and more trauma just getting them off. So if we were going to put together a first aid kit that kind of helps to know, I'm going to put her down. So, and then we'll talk about a cat too. But so a first aid kit, some things to have on hand for basic injuries, and this is just a tie. Piper, come here, one more time. Come here, just for a minute. I'm going to show you how to use this as a muzzle. Come here, Piper. Piper, come here. Good girl. So if there's an injury, sorry, I put her down a little prematurely, and you do not have a muzzle, this is any dog that is hurt can bite. And so a muzzle is important to keep both you and your dog safe. So this, I'm just going to put on, I'm going to cross it and then just go up behind her ears. This will keep her, if she was injured, if she had a problem, it would keep her from biting. Most people think their dog would never bite. And I would hope that they wouldn't, but when an animal is scared or hurt, sometimes they do, and it's just a reaction. So being prepared for that is a good idea. All right, Piper, good girl. So some of the things that I have used repeatedly in a first aid kit is, let me just grab some of these. So let's just say that your animal had eaten something that they shouldn't. These kinds of syringes are kind of big. They can hold a lot of fluid. You can also use them to rinse or irrigate something. If your animal has swallowed something poisonous or something that's going to make them sick, hydrogen peroxide is guaranteed to make them vomit, and so that is a way to get that into them. These products are safe for animals. I'm going to show them, but I think the best thing to do would be to talk to your vet about how they would recommend you use them. So, I mean, these are things that are safe, but the doses and stuff can vary depending on your animal and the situation, what they've ingested. We can use Benadryl and aspirin. They're things that you can use until you get to the vet. Aspirin is good in a pinch, but for long term, not as safe for the stomach, can cause some bleeding and stuff. So it's good for a short, something that, until you get to the vet. Benadryl for allergies, for itching, for anxiety. This is a good one. Benadryl is 1 milligram per pound of body weight. So a 25-pound dog would get 1 Benadryl. This isn't something, again, to use long-term, but it is good until you can get to the vet and find out why they're exhibiting these things. So with George, this is our cat, George. He is both an outside and inside cat, depending on his mood for the day. he has obviously got a lot of hair. So some of the problems you see with a cat, he is probably about 10 years old. And so with a 10-year-old cat, you start to have some other things that you need to look at, other concerns. All right, George, just a second. So with a cat with long hair, one of the biggest problems that you can have is when they groom themselves, they can get hairballs. So one of the products that I've really liked is like Laxatone. It's something that you can give them, and you just put it in their mouth and it helps to lubricate and get that out of there. Also in a pinch, we've used Vaseline that we just put on their paws to lick it off and help that hairball come up. There are a lot of things for a cat that you need to check. Their nose needs to be clear. There's a lot of respiratory problems that cats can contract if they're outside. Their eyes need to be clear. A little bit of booger in the side of an eye is not a big deal. You can just wipe it out. But if they have pink eyes or congested eyes, it's something that you can wipe out and keep an eye on. And there's ointments and things that you can use. But if you use the wrong ointment, you can make some problems worse and some, he's not in the mood to be held right now. So something's worse and something's better. So always a good idea to watch for those things and see when they change. One thing with cats as well, we were talking about trimming dogs' nails. With cats, some people choose to trim the cat's nails. They will scratch whatever they can to get those nails sharp and grow back. So you have to take that into consideration. Sometimes trimming their nails will make them want to scratch your furniture. But again, nail clippers, there are different sizes for different animals. Just find one that you can easily put in your hand and easily use on the animal. So if, I'm looking for my quick stop. If you are trimming your animals, thank you, nails, it's a good idea to have just a quick stop or a blood stop. You can use this on birds, nails, dogs, cats, and you just can put it on a Q-tip. I wet the Q-tip and dip it in and then put it on the nail, and it'll stop the bleeding. They do tend to bleed heavily, and it can be kind of scary, but it's just a powder and it stops it. If you don't have any of this, you can use anything that, you can even use flour, anything that can kind of stick to that nail and it'll stop it from bleeding. Okay, so with a first aid kit, there are a couple other things. You should have a sharp pair of scissors. There's so many things that animals can get into that it's an emergency to get it off. Also something that you can use like a needle nose or something that you can use to grab and remove things. And we'll talk about that a little bit with like some choking problems or other things. So those are good to have on hand. Just put a kit together that is basic things. I also have vet wrap. This comes in handy to cover like a wound on a paw, but we'll actually show some of that too. So, so if you know your animal, you know what's normal, then when things come up, you know kind of what to tell the vet or to talk to them about the changes. So wherever your pet is going to be, it'll save you a lot in the long run if you look around and you take note of what plants are around. I've seen dogs that have eaten tulips that came up, you know, it was just for a short time and caused some major organ failure. So there's so many plants that can cause injury. It doesn't mean they'll always eat them, but if they're bored, that's, you know, what dogs do sometimes. So look around your yard, look at this plant. There are even apps that you can look at that will tell you, you know, just by taking a picture of the plant, if it's safe. There is an emergency hotline number for poison control that also can tell you about poison plants. And and I can give you that number, or, I mean, of course, you can always look it up. The number is 888-426-4435. I think if there's a long consultation, I believe that they may charge you, but it's not much. But for basic questions, they're there 24 hours a day. So let's talk about some of the injuries that you can look at and diagnose just by knowing your pet. So let's start with bleeding. So if you want to hand me just like a rabbit or something, and I'll just show you. So if your animal gets hurt and they're bleeding, so this is one of our rabbits that are held all the time by kids, so they're pretty friendly. But if they say they had a gash or a cut, it's something that you were worried about, it's excessive bleeding, the best thing to do would be to have some gauze on hand, or even paper towels, anything that is going to, that you can use to put pressure on it. So the general rule is you're going to put pressure on it. So let's just say that there was cut. You're going to put pressure on that, and the hardest thing to do is to not keep checking that, not keep looking at it. But the general rule is you want to keep pressure on it for 3 minutes. That would give the body enough time to actually clot itself to where it's not going to bleed. If that's not working and it's continuing to bleed, that's when you know, okay, I need to take my animal to the vet, continue to hold the pressure and get them there. If by, you know, some chance it's a limb, like an arm or leg, and the bleeding is significant, you can use a tourniquet. You can use a shoestring, anything that you can get to do a tourniquet. You want to put it, of course, above the injury. The general rule is, I mean, you're going to tie it off tight enough that the bleeding stops, but you don't want to leave it continually. So 15 minutes, and then you got to take it off for at least 20 seconds so that that blood flow will continue and that they won't lose any function of their arm or leg. So with a rabbit, and I've even had a problem with something smaller that needed to go to the vet and to keep them from biting, you can use whatever you have that's safe. I have used a tube sock for a squirrel that was had some serious injuries, so that he would not get to it, and so that it, you know, it would keep him mobilized. I've used a tube sock and just cut a little hole in the end so he could breathe. Very important that they have the ability, they don't suffocate. A pillowcase, whatever you need to keep your animal safe to get to the vet is important to just have on hand. And if you think these things through before the accident, or heaven forbid ever happens, you're more prepared and able to deal with it. So rabbits have nails that need trimmed as well. I would say that rabbits are probably a little bit both more difficult and easier in a way, because if you have a very tame rabbit, you can put them in your lap and they will get used to getting their nails trimmed. If not, then they can be vicious little weapons that they use to protect themselves, especially with those back feet. So it's important to know how to hold your rabbit if you have one. So I always tell kids that are holding them here that a rabbit, just like any animal that is a prey animal, is supposed to have its feet on the ground. So if you pick them up and their feet are in the air, it's going to be scary. If their feet are touching you, then they feel safe. So teaching your rabbit to lay on its back and get its nails trimmed takes some practice and takes some patience, so that they trust you. The other way is to have somebody help you and just hold on to the rabbit, and then somebody else can just extend it and you can trim them. The rabbit's claws don't retract, and so it's important that you move the fur and you find that quick. So I don't know, sometimes it's hard to zoom with the light in here and see this, but the rabbit, this one has very sharp little claws. and you can see the quick about halfway. Probably a darker background would help. But, and again, with these little tiny ones, the best way to trim those is not just to cut, but to put it on the nail and then slide it up until you feel the right angle. So where the nail starts to curve down, and then to clip it. So it doesn't cause him any stress. And the more times you do that, and then of course, when he's being held, he gets a reward, then he'll learn to trust you and be able to trim their nails. So we're talking about bleeding. There's some things that you can check for in an injury if your animal has been attacked by another animal. Unfortunately, that happens, and sometimes they just act different. There's no way to tell what's wrong. They're just off. And so if an animal had internal bleeding, there's some signs that you can look for. Sometimes they'll have blood coming from their nose, their mouth, even from their rectum. Anytime that there's blood coming from that, it's good to assume that there is an injury that is serious. The best thing that you can do would be to check their gums. And that's what we talked about with like the dog. If you know what color the gums are, internal bleeding, one of the best ways with that and with a few other things is to know if the blood has gone from their mouth and it's been pulled in to protect them. And so they'll have very white gums or pale gums. That's true with any animal. With rabbits, look at their lips. If their lips and their nose, they've got a very pink color to them. A rabbit that's in shock or has been injured, that will kind of turn grayish, blue almost if they're in shock. And that's a good indicator because their little noses have a pretty good blood flow to them. So you want to look at that. And you can also look in their ears again and see if there's a change in color, then you know that something is going on. So let's say that you do find that your animal is in shock. What do you do? The best thing to start with is to stay calm. It's easy to get panicky when our animals are injured, and that panic transfers to them. So staying calm, get someone to help you. And if there's a couple things you can check for, like a weak pulse or a rapid pulse. So with some of these smaller animals, you can just put your hands on both sides of their ribs. If they're stressed, they'll sometimes just hold still and you just lay them on their side and you just feel for that heart rate. It's good to know what's normal, again, for your animal. So with a dog, you're gonna have a heart rate from 60 to 140 beats per minute. That's normal. It's a little different. It's gonna be a little higher for a small dog, a little lower for a big dog. Cats run 160 to 240 beats a minute, and rabbits are even faster. So how do you check what their pulse is? Check it now so you know what's normal. The best way is to count for 15 seconds and then times it by 4. You can do it for a full minute and count, but it can be so fast that it's hard to keep up with. Temperatures, good idea to know what's normal. So let's just say with your dog or cat, normal body temperature is going to be 100.5 to 102.5. Not considered a fever until we're going over 102.5. So good to know. How do you check your animal's temperature? There is only one sure way to check the temperature, and that would be rectal. A rectal thermometer, it needs to be one that is for fever, or else they may not go high enough for an animal. Pet stores will have them, but you don't have to get a specialty one. You just have to get one that reads high enough for your animal. You can use a little Vaseline on those. When you do insert, you are going to kind of go down. You don't want to just go straight in. You don't want to force it. With a dog, it's pretty easy. Of course, they don't enjoy it, so you have to make sure that they're in a safe place that you can have help. Some dogs act like they don't notice, some do, so just know your dog. Cats, they have a little bit stronger reflex. When you put a thermometer in, you want to go slow. So they will relax after a moment, and you can put it in a little further, just so that you know you don't want to rush that on a cat. And again, you want to go in and kind of at a down angle. You don't want to just go in straight. You don't have to go in very far, just enough that that probe is inside. So that's how you're going to tell if they're having any problems with shock. Shallow breathing, weak pulse, or rapid, they can be nervous or they can just collapse. One reason you want to look at your animal's eyes is when they're in shock, their eyes look dazed, and they can be, so right now, I don't know if you can really tell, but this rabbit's got a little bit of a wide-eyed look. He's alert. If he was in shock from an injury or from illness, his eyes would be glazed. They would be, and you'd know this by, of course, knowing what's normal, but they would not be looking around. They would just kind of be out of focus and dazed. So again, something that you would really notice if you knew what was normal for your pet. So let's talk about a limb injury. And I think I'll use a lamb, of a little lamb, so that, because my corgi's legs are so short, I think it would be easier to show you on one of these lambs. So we just finished lambing, and I have a couple of lambs that were on the very small side. So this is Victoria. She's doing very well, very healthy, eating well. But so how would we notice or know if our animal had a broken leg, or and what would we do? So the first sign, of course, would be that the animal is not putting weight on the leg. So if, you know, if she was keeping one of her legs up, limping, we would do an assessment on the leg. She's going to eat my finger. That's not pain. That's, I'm always hungry. So you would want to kind of go over the body, starting top or bottom, but just touch each part. And if you feel like they retract or pull away or show any signs of pain, then you'll kind of know where the pain is. If it's an obvious break, you don't need to do that. If it's a tendon, you kind of need to know what you need to immobilize. So with her, if she did have a broken, say it was in one of these parts, then you would need to immobilize it. If it was a more serious break, you also need to immobilize it, but you want to be a little bit careful if there's a serious break and not make things worse by trying to put them back in place. You just want to keep it as best you can. And I'll show you some things that you can use on the, you know, in a pinch. So this is a little big for her, but if you had an animal, a bigger dog or something that had a broken leg or had something that you're trying to keep them immobilized, putting something like this, anything that you can find around it, and keeping it so that they are not going to have it, you know, dangle or anything in the vehicle or whack it around, anything that you can use to immobilize it. And then this is one of my favorite things at the doctor's office. It's called Coban. At IFA, it's called vet wrap. It works great. It sticks to itself. Easy to unwrap if you can find where it started. And yeah, it's really great for holding on any kind of, you know, impromptu bandage or whatever you needed to. Something that if you have the ability to get is PVC pipe. And you know, if you have a larger dog or a smaller dog, you can just get a PVC pipe and just kind of, we just ground the edges so that they're soft. And then we'll just put one on each side of an injured area and then just wrap it with the vet wrap. Use cotton to keep it from rubbing the limb. And then you'll be able to keep it immobilized until you get to your vet. So, so if, let's see, is Piper still there? So choking, if we move to an animal choking, there's, you know, with people, we have the universal sign where, you know, we grab our throat. How do you know if your animal is choking? With dogs, cats, with any of the other animals, there will be the shaking of the head. They usually put their paws against their face and will push. They will gag. She's right down there. And you can kind of tell, I'm going to give you this little trade. Thank you. So if my dog was choking, come here, good girl, she would put her paws next to her mouth and kind of act like she's trying to push something out. If it's past that point and they pass out, then there is a way that you can force the air. So you would turn them on their side. Let me see if you lay down for me, Piper's a good girl. Turn them on their side and then lay them flat. And then you're gonna use just the palm of your hand, and just on the rib cage, you're just gonna hit it 3 or 4 times. Pretty hard, not so hard you're gonna break your rib, of course, but hard enough that you're gonna expel air. And that's the idea, is to expel the air. So another thing to have in your first aid kit is my flashlight, which is here somewhere. A flashlight, you can look in their mouth, and if you know that there's possibility they're choking, you don't want to spend too much time trying to find it, but you do want to look. So if you can, you know, grab their tongue, pull it to the side, and see if you can see anything. If you can, you want to try and get it out, and that's where those, either the needle nose or pliers that are small, can grab something. If you're unable to get it, don't spend too much time trying, because it can make it go down further. And so it's a good idea to look, see if you can get it, try to force the air out, which will expel it. Look with the flashlight, and if you are unable to, then call ahead to the vet, tell them you're on the way, and have somebody able to hold the dog and continue to try and expel it. Usually their body will help you to get that out. They'll force, they'll vomit, but if not, then you need to be there to be able to get down there and grab it. So let's talk about some other things that are coming up that are possible. So like heat stroke is pretty common. We see that a lot in the summer at the vet's office. And, you know, if you know your dog's environment and where they can go, you'll know whether or not they have shade and they have water. They can regulate their temperature if they have water. If for some reason they're unable to get to water, they can quickly have complications, their temperature rise too high. So one of the things to look for, or several things that you look for in a heat stroke, would be similar to shock. You're gonna see a weak pulse. You're gonna see first panting, and then they can collapse or become lethargic. And it's really important at that point that they get cooled off. So getting a towel or cloth of some kind, and if you have access to a hose or wherever you are, you get water, and you're gonna wanna put that water on their belly and down between, so this whole area right here, you're gonna wanna keep it wet. So then after it's wet, you're gonna wipe the water off again, because it's that evaporation is going to keep it cool. And you're gonna want to make sure that their body temperature, where their belly is, between their legs, is more skin usually, which can help to get their body cooled off quickly. You don't want to immerse them in ice. You can, you know, get an ice pack and wrap it in a towel, like for driving, but you don't want to put ice directly on them. It's more likely to just give them a burn from the ice, and can cause more problems. and it can send them into shock if they're not already there. So cool water, get their body temperature cooled off. So what happens if your dog is having, has had something like this and they go into a fit or a seizure? This can happen too once their body can't handle things. Also can happen randomly. They don't always know the reason, but dogs can have seizures. If it happens once, then it can be something environmental, it can be something stress. But if it continues to happen, you need to know what to do to keep your dog safe. You don't want to immobilize them if they're having a seizure, but you do want to look at the environment around them, make sure there's things moved so they're not going to hit their head, they're not going to get hurt. You want to keep them warm and you want to keep them safe. You want to record the time that the seizure lasted. So the vet's going to want to know, what was going on before the seizure. Were they eating anything? Were they doing anything? And so it's really good to kind of watch your dog and know how long that seizure lasted. So if there's something that they're having a seizure by chairs or by something that they could, hit really hard and injure their spine or something, you want to make sure and just keep the environment safe. So with that, there's several things that can show the same symptoms. So you need to know, again, your animal. So poisons, this is something that we do see a lot of because especially some types of dogs, things like Labradors seem to want to eat everything regardless of, if it's food or not. So if your animal eats something that is poison, you can call the poison hotline. You can use the hydrogen peroxide to get them to pass it, to throw it up. You can also use a charcoal to help absorb it. But how do you know what you're supposed to do? If you have, we'll just say this is poison. It's not, it's hydrogen peroxide. But it will say on the back, what to do in case ingested or what to do in case you want to follow those instructions just like you would with a person on your animal. And if you're able, then you want to take packaging, you want to take any information and take that with you to the vet. That way they'll know the best course to treat that, particular poisoning or, whatever that they got into. So making a list before you go to the vet, take a baggie. Say you have some changes in the stool, you want to put some of that in a baggie, and you can, if you can't make it right away, put it in your fridge. That sounds gross, but you don't want it to start to break down anything, and take it with you to the vet. So another thing that is a common health problem and that we have a lot of questions about is parasites, things that can just from environment cause harm to your animal. So what parasites do we have here? What things to look out for? So the one thing I can tell you that is great about where we live is we don't have as many fleas. They can't really survive our environment. There's fleas on some, foxes and wild animals that can get on your dog. So you do need to check them. The heartworm, which is a problem in other places, is transferred by mosquitoes. We don't have here. So the only time that your dog would get heartworm is if they went to a warmer climate, were bit by a mosquito, and then came back here. But there would not be transferring of that because we don't have the heartworm here. So that's really good. If you go out to hiking or anything, you want to check your dog. We have been out in the hills and found, a tick or something on our animals. So it's really good to check them if you go out in the brush afterwards and look for that kind of stuff. The internal parasites, the best guide would be to notice any changes. So the hard part with parasites is there's a lot of symptoms. that can range anywhere from a cough to diarrhea to blood in their stool to a swollen abdomen if the parasites are bad enough. So knowing what's normal again is going to really help guide you on what's going on with my animal. Again, a stool sample to take with you to the vet is a really good idea because they can check and see what kind of shedding or what kind of eggs are in the stool. The reason you want to do that is not every medication treats every kind of parasite. There are some medications that will treat a variety and you'd be good, but if it wasn't the one your dog had, then it isn't going to treat it. So with cats, George didn't want to stay here, but they can get exposed to parasites and to viruses and different things just by being around other cats. Dogs, of course, get things from other dogs as well, but cats tend to get more sinus infections and things that they can get from just being around where other cats use the bathroom, where other cats are eating. And so good to know if they're sneezing or if they've got goopy eyes. Can be different reasons for those things. So you need to keep an eye on and see if, like if a cat gets really goopy eyes and they get sealed over, which can happen with a lot of wild kittens, it can be a sign of a sinus infection, or it can also be a sign of some other serious issues, especially if there's diarrhea and other things associated with it. So knowing that, being able to take a stool sample with you would be really good for, you know, any kind of taking them to the vet. So.
Thank you. Oh,
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say we're getting a little low on time. Is it okay if we give a little bit of time for questions?
Definitely, yes.
Wonderful. Misty, thank you so much. This is really helpful information. And we've had so many people contacting us about questions since your class. Before we start with the questions, I just want to let you know that Misty's pet health class will be offered in the fall. That's what we're hoping for if everything tames down. So be looking for that, and she has a wealth of knowledge to share if you'd like to get more of that information. So let's go to our first question. We have a question. When your dog is choking, does it matter which side you turn them on to pat their ribs?
It doesn't, just as long as they're on a solid surface. Put them on their side and use, just use the pressure to expel air from their lungs. So it doesn't matter which side they're on.
Okay, thank you. And then we have a question from George. He says, I hear parvo is a serious problem with puppies. What are some of the warning signs?
Parvo is probably the most tragic and of the, diseases that can affect dogs. So it's really important that when you get a puppy, that you are isolating that puppy to your area, not taking them out around other dogs until they've had at least 2 of their immunizations to get the antibodies. With parvo, they can become lethargic, diarrhea and vomiting. Those are not always present at first. The not eating, throwing up, those things can show up before they get like bloody stool. And so if your puppy is lethargic and that lasts, for a day and they have a fever, get them into the vet right away. The earlier that you treat parvo, the better the outcome. If they get dehydrated, they quickly go downhill, and it's really hard for the vet to keep them hydrated. And they give them different medications to get them through it, but there is not a specific medication. There's preventative and there's treatment, but there isn't any magic cure. So it's really hard on puppies. So yeah, watch for those things. Any blood in the stool or vomiting is a big sign and need to get them in ASAP.
Thank you. That's good to know. What about for older dogs? Can older dogs still get parvo, or is it unheard of for older dogs?
It can happen. With older dogs, it's not nearly as severe. So with little dogs, with puppies, it destroys the lining in their intestine, and they can't absorb fluids, they can't absorb nutrition. and they don't have a resource because, you know, being so young. So older dogs can get it and not really even show signs, and older dogs can just get a little sick, but it's really a puppy disease. After they're a year, it's not nearly as concerning as before.
Okay. We have one last question. Thank you, Misty.
Yeah.
With if dogs are playing outside and living outside, is it possible for their nails to wear down naturally and they wouldn't need a nail clipping, or do dogs in those situations still need nail clippings?
Just like people, you know, some people's nails grow strong and healthy, and some people's are thin and brittle. With dogs, generally, if they're outside and they're able to dig and they're able to wear their nails down, they don't need their nails trimmed near as much. Mostly house dogs, dogs who just are on carpet or soft things, they're the ones who can't wear theirs down. So you just have to look and know what's normal and make sure that the nail is not growing so long that it's going to cause injury or get caught on things.
Okay. That's good to know. Misty, thank you so much. Oh, and before we go, I see your sign in the back, Share a Farm. Can you tell us a little bit about that before we go?
Okay, so basically our little petting farm is designed so that we can teach kids and adults about how the relationship between animals and people can be rewarding, to kind of get people comfortable with animals, learn more about animals. Sometimes we work with kids who are struggling, and animals really can just bring out so much of their, you know, personality, and animals are safe, you know, if they're in a safe environment. And so they're really therapeutic. We have a lot of really friendly animals and one-on-one. So it's just about, also if you want to hug a goat or have one climb on you, it's the perfect place to come.
That is great. Thank you so much, Misty. Thank you for sharing with us today.
Yeah,
and
thank
we'll
you.
Look forward to your class in the fall.
All right, thank you very much.
I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. We truly hope you enjoyed learning something new. You can watch the recordings of this and all our classes at suu.edu/keeplearning or on our YouTube channel named Be Wise Keep Learning. We're truly grateful for your attendance today, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, Misty.
Thank you.
Great day all.
Thanks.